Yesterday, I talked with Admiral Mark Montgomery, retired United States Navy, and I didn't have enough time. I ran out of time, so I asked him if I could impose on him 2 days in a row when he's back. Admiral, I did not realize when we talked yesterday you had recently been to Israel and had some perspective on the fighting in Gaza. That war is very little covered. Even in the English language Israeli press, it's as though the world lost interest in what the IDF is doing. What did you find out when you were in Israel?
Well, look, since the failure of the negotiations on the hostage exchange and continued ceasefire, the Israelis have really pressed in hard, and they've done what they need to do. They need to defeat and disarm Hamas. To do that, they have to enter Gaza, and they've re-entered Gaza aggressively, establishing several security corridors. I saw significant, armored vehicles, tanks, heard a lot of automatic fire, but most importantly, when I was out at Nevatine Airfield, saw a lot of large-scale munitions, and they are really taking the fight to Hamas again. People who think that the first 16 months of the war defeated Hamas, that's just not true. They were weakened, not defeated, and the Israelis have to go back to this. That they cannot get to a successful long-term resolution where Egypt is providing the security in Gaza until they have defeated Hamas, because Egypt would never defeat Hamas on its own.
Now, Admiral, there's a report in the Israeli press today that the new head of the IDF has told the Israeli cabinet, we don't have enough soldiers. And we got it. The reserves have been pressed to the wall with 16 months of service. They're bedraggled. Their businesses are falling apart, and that they haven't got the manpower to do this. Did you hear that, or is that should we arch an eye at that, because it's not? There's a counter story that that's nonsense. But did you see any signs of war weariness on the part of the IDF?
So I would break that up, and I would say, is it factually accurate that they have not invested enough in the army before October 7th? That was true. So when October 7th started, Israel had taken several years of risk, and so they could buy the F-35s, maintain their defense budget at only 5% of GDP, and that risk was evidenced in the performance of the army at the beginning of the war, particularly the reservists. Now, what's happened is they've gone back to the well. These reservists are on their third, fourth, fifth, sixth activations for 60, 90, 180 days. I mean, they begin to add up. And so they have the forces they need to win, but they definitely have stressed their fantastic active reserve model, they should be the envy of many of our allies like Taiwan. They have stressed that model to the maximum. I think he was saying what he believes to be true, which is that model is stressed. They need to make investments in defense. They need to improve how they treat and take care of their reservists, and then they have to recognize that that they need to invest more in the army long term if they're going to have a ground campaign like this again.
Now, Admiral, even a civilian like me understands the Philadelphia corridor had to be punched through to kill the smuggling. And I understand the corridor, Netzarim corridor, in the middle of Gaza was done for tactical reasons so that they could strike north or south as needed. I don't understand where the Marag corridor is or what its tactical utility is. Do you have a good grip on that?
So I think I'm not an expert, but it strikes me as a centralized area from which they can control different avenues. In other words, it's not really a corridor; it's like a triangle, and I think it just gives them being able to operate from there, gives them the flexibility and agility to punch Hamas in the face when they raise their head. So from my perspective, I think they need both corridors and that triangle as they do this. Look, this isn't permanent, but they're not going to do what they did in the past, I think, which is take and release. And they're going to have to take these things and hold them for some period of time while they affect their operations against Hamas.
Now,
And they're going to need help from us too.
Admiral, a year and a half's a long time. Do they have the tunnel system mapped, if not destroyed yet?
I think they have an idea. I think their mapping's pretty close. I wouldn't say on destruction. And look, there'll be some unknown unknowns, as Dom Rumsfeld said. There'll be some they don't know about. And by the way, Thank you, Egypt, for not doing your job for 10 years while we paid you $1.3 billion a year in FMF, and you couldn't keep an eye on these on what was going on there. I mean, this is like building. What's gone on there is akin to like the Channel, and supposedly
In Boston. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a pretty remarkable construction project for nefarious purposes, but it's still pretty remarkable. I think of that scene from The Great Escape where each prisoner would come out and put a little bit of sand on the ground from where they were digging. Where'd they put all the dirt?
I mean, in theory, they'd extend Gaza, extend about another 4 miles into the sea.
Yeah.
If they were doing that. But they had some good help, North Koreans and Chinese, equipment and personnel. So so all our friends were there. Hugh, everyone from the axis of authoritarians is a piece of this problem, this puzzle for Israel and the United States to solve.
Has this brought clarity to Israel? I'm going to mix up our geopolitical issues. When I was last in Israel, I was part of the journalist team, 6 of us traveling with a then National Security Advisor, Bolton. And one of the conversations I had was with a former senior official in the Israeli government about the fact they were doing deals with Huawei. And I said, look, you can't be dealing with the Chi-Coms. And he said, look, we gotta keep sure that we've got our eye on both sides of the globe. Has Israel thrown in with us now? Have they decided it's a bipolar world again?
They 100%, they're with us on China. They have disengaged and decoupled in their trade. How China responded to October 7th was the final straw. Things were happening before then, but they've accelerated aggressively. Russia's a little different. There's a lot of Jews living in Russia, and Vladimir Putin has a habit of terrorizing people, to gain effect. So they have to be very careful with Russia. But Russia's support from Iran on with the Shaheeds and their support back to Iran on weapon systems is forcing Israel to the reckoning on that too. That's a tougher reckoning. There aren't too many Jews in China. There are a lot of Jews still in Russia, and Putin is a stone cold killer. So they have to be.
Well, yeah, what he did on Easter was butcher scores of children with missiles the day after Witkoff was there. That's the middle finger to President Trump, if you ask me. Let me ask you about Iran and Russia. Is Russia giving Iran S-400s that are any better than the ones that Israel took out the last time?
So we'll have to see what they get. So you're right. Now, Iran lost their strategic air defense in the October attack, not their indigenous air defense. So they lost those S-300s that they had. They're going to both repair those and get new ones eventually. I think it's likely they'll get S-400s. Who knows? Maybe Turkey's got some S-400s to give away pretty soon, as they come around to working with us. But the Iranians are going to get new strategic air defense systems. I will say, though, despite what Elon Musk thinks, the F-35 is kind of a kick-butt aircraft. And whether it's flown by Israeli pilots or U.S. pilots, it will eliminate that strategic air defense system prior to U.S. or Israeli forces flying kind of feet dry over the country.
I had a friend who put forward, Mark Vandroff, you may know him, the Vandroff proposition: if countries not obliged to buy the F-35 buy the F-35, that's proof of concept. And he began to tick off all the countries that want to buy the F-35, and there are a lot of them. That is, to me, proof of concept. Does that make sense to you?
It does. Look, part of it is the U.S. also provides a massive high-quality data link that goes with it, with lots of information. So if you want to fly with us, if you're flying with us in combat and you're in an F-35, your pilots are a lot safer. Your mission success rate is going to be a lot higher. It is the best fighter aircraft in the world flying today. I think if it has a competition, it's the F-22.
I was going to say, I thought you'd get an argument from the F-22 pilots, Admiral.
I will, and so I'm going to concede that if there's one. Now, when you add in air-to-ground capability, and let me just tell you, what's hammering Gaza with U.S. weapons are F-35s. They're just as much involved as F-15s or F-16s.
The last thing I'll say is they continue to eliminate one by one everyone involved in 10/7. I don't think they're ever going to stop until anyone who came into Israel on 10/7 is dead. Do you?
I don't. They didn't stop on the Munich terrorists until they got them all, and it took them 20 plus years. They won't stop on these guys, and it's going to take a hell of a lot less than 20 plus years.
I agree. Admiral Mark Montgomery, thank you for coming back to join me from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies.